there. Thank you.
There's probably no bigger issue facing the industry in terms of environmental redevelopment, at least, than PFAS. There's not an insignificant level of concern that this emergent contaminant of concern is going to bring redevelopment to a complete stop. We're not actually seeing that. There are various ways in which you can structure transactions, technically, financially, legally, to hedge your downside risk. But from a regulatory perspective and a science perspective, it's still exceedingly important to understand where EPA falls in all of this and the regulations that they're looking at, especially with respect to whether or not PFAS will be added to CERCLA as a hazardous substance. David, we're looking forward to hearing your comments.
Great. Gene, if you're still in the room, I need to talk to you about a block of rooms that I have on my government credit card. It's going to be a little bit of a problem when I get back. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I did not click the link. So I want to manage expectations. As you notice, I do not have a PE after my name. I have a lot of really smart folks who work with me, who have PhDs, PEs. I have a knack for explaining the science to the lawyers and the law to the scientists. So that's one of the skills they said, you know, if you get to EPA, you're going to need to add people from the politicians, people for career people. So that's kind of what I do. I'll talk a little bit about where I fall within EPA. Of course, you know, we have the big Office of Land. That's where I am, Office of Water, Office of Air. Within our Office of Land, we have the Superfund office, and I work in a particular group that focuses on federal facilities. So we serve as the lead regulator for federal facility sites. We provide technical assistance, mainly oversight. We work a lot with Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NASA down here has some sites. Public involvement is a big piece of what we have to assist our federal partners with, because they're not particularly good at times of reaching out to the public and explaining to the public. Even though sometimes the people on those bases are the ones in harm's way. And we want to make sure that they have a voice and the communities around these federal facilities have a voice. Talk real quick about what my office does. Again, we work closely with all the services. As you notice, we work with the services, we work with states, we work with counties, municipalities, and particularly work with public groups. Our goal is to reuse where we can. I think many of you remember the BRAC years where we were repurposing a lot of these sites. So that was a big lift for our group. Now we're focused a lot on these facilities where they're continuing to do cleanups. We have federal facilities like Hanford, which we'll be working on for thousands of years. Oak Ridge, we just did a big rod down in Oak Ridge that's $900 million. It's going to run out for the next 30 years down there. So we've got some really big ones. We've got some really small ones too, where we're dealing with particular small things like vapor intrusion off-site in a particular town. So we have kind of the whole breadth in the federal group. A couple of quick facts. There are 175 federal facilities on the NPL. We just listed one for the first time in 20-some years. Bradford Island was listed this past round. Of course, there are thousands of non-NPL federal sites. We deal with them particularly when mayors, governors, politicians get upset. The primary focus for our office is on those 175 federal facilities, getting them through the Superfund process to clean up. As I mentioned, there's a lot of folks living around these. We're talking about within a mile, about 1% of the U.S. population lives within a mile of a federal facility Superfund site. 12 million people are about 3 miles out. The work that we do, we're proud of because it really helps those communities. We support the businesses around those sites as they get redeveloped. They employ lots of businesses. I was out giving an award a while ago in Minnesota, and they had a great brewery on one of the sites that they had cleaned up. That was a fun thing to go to. And we're talking billions of dollars in employee income and tax base as we clean up these federal facilities. So I'll talk a little bit about PFAS, and again, I'm not a PE, but folks help me get through the slides here. We are seeing PFAS everywhere. We're not just seeing it where there's an airport, where there's an air guard base, where somebody had used AFFF firefighting foam. We're seeing it platers, we're seeing it all different types of sources. The DoD right now has a list of 700 facilities that they're investigating, and they're starting at the PASI phase, the really early investigations, to see what they can find. A lot of these will progress on to the remedial investigation phase and then the cleanup phase, but we're not there yet. But again, 700 that they've identified so far. This primarily comes from something in their defense bill that said you must get through these sites by 2023. So they're working very hard to get through those initial assessments at those sites. We're seeing the same with Department of Energy, with NASA, with DOI, all working very hard on their sites. This is just the federal side. On the private side, again, we're still seeing lots of PFAS everywhere. Almost every time you look, you find it. And that's probably not surprising to anybody in this room. Particularly when we get to some of the non-NPL sites, lots of questions of ownership. Where is it coming from? When it's in these plumes, we're seeing, of course, mixed use in terms of contributors. We're also looking at some of the science behind it. Are we seeing volatile organics from these sites? So we're doing, hopefully, some research coming up soon with NASA to look into that. So this slide probably is not familiar to anybody here. This is our resident soil screening levels, updated in May of 22. This is kind of how we're looking at the world right now when we're going out and screening these sites. As we have the RFDs, we're creating some soil screening levels, and we're converting those into what we see in tap water. Those numbers are, as everyone saw coming, very low. 4, 6 parts per trillion. These, again, are based on the draft science. So those numbers could go lower. We are having lots of questions about how low can we go in terms of testing? What can we see? How far do we need to go? What do we do when we see multi-contaminants at a site? So those are questions that we're trying to answer. It's taking a lot because this is moving so quickly for us at headquarters. And we're working closely with our regions who are on the ground, working with folks. They're also working with the states and others. We're also looking at the new IRIS tox values under development. So we're getting closer with some of those other PFBAs, PFDAs and things. We're near final on getting those into our RSL table. External peer review is expected on some of the other ones, and you're looking at kind of mid-23, late 23. Before we get those finished up. Some of the expectations, and this applies to the federal facilities, but again, private sides are going there too on Superfund. We're going to screen using these RSL tables. We're going to expect that folks are looking at the groundwater, we're looking at the tap water, we're looking at the drinking water to see where we are on these sites. If we find numbers, and again, our previous number was 70, as you know, so now we're using a number instead of 70, we're using 4 and 6 in terms of screening these sites. We're going to go back and we're going to screen data that's already been collected at these sites. So we're going to go back and look where we may have said there's no further action, a NIFRAP site, go back and look, see what we're finding. Where screening hasn't been done, we're going to push forward and have that screening done. And again, on the federal side, we're working with DoD, DOE. On the private side, a lot of these are fund leads, so the government's doing that work. Risk communication is something that we're, and I'll be frank, we're struggling with it. It's tough in these communities to go out and explain why bottled water here, not bottled water there, or why treatment systems are going in here, why they aren't going in there. I think this is going to be a big focus over the next year, year and a half in terms of how are we communicating to communities, to businesses, to the regulated community, what we expect and how we expect the risk to be handled. And again, as these numbers push down, it's difficult. Many of you are probably working on lead too and watching what's happening with EPA and lead. Where are we going to be with lead? Again, another huge, huge deal with risk communication with the public. So coming up, well, summer we proposed to designate PFAS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA. So under the Superfund law, that will become a hazardous substance. That proposed rule went out, and it garnered a few comments. 164,000 comments came in. I used to work in RCRA writing regs, so I understand letter writing campaigns. Yeah, I know. We could do that on a weekend. We were laughing at these guys. We're like, you seriously? But what we did see on the last day were the significant comments. The big hitters all came in on the last day. And they weren't just a few comments. They were pages and pages and pages, as you might have expected, written by very smart folks who know both the science side and the legal side. So it's going to take us a while to get through those. We're going to go through, and we're going to see where we stand. Our expectation is to have a final rule in summer of '23. Again, that'll depend on how things go. We've seen a lot of people threatening legal challenges to it, a lot of people digging in on where are you with your economic analysis and those types of things. So again, we're going to have to consider all of those factors as we move forward. At the same time, we were going to put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, an ANPR, to look at some additional PFAS to be added as substances. Again, we expect to get that out this fall, if we can. So on the RCRA side, again, I used to work in this group for 28 years, doing everything from PCB cleanups to RCRA permitted cleanups to writing regs. We have a couple changes that we're making on the RCRA side. One is to the statutory definition. In the regs, EPA has always said that we can use that broader statutory definition to compel corrective action under RCRA 3004U. The regs don't say that, so people smartly pointed that out to us, so we're going in and we're fixing that. Again, both of these rules we're hoping summer '23 as proposals, and then it takes 12 months, 18 months to get to a final usually. For the other part, we're going to add certain PFAS to our RCRA hazardous constituents list. It's called Appendix 8, if you're familiar with it. Again, it gives us authority then to require corrective action at our TSDFs, our permitted TSDFs, if we have that on the list. So again, those are coming summer '23. Internally, we're kind of working through the processes, putting together our preambles, putting together reg language, putting together our supporting documentation. So those are on the way. Quick lightning round. Again, I'll hit on these, and I'm going to go through a couple of the other agency priorities, but we can come back to questions. I'm going to try and leave about 5 minutes for that here on the end. Our 2019 groundwater guidance, again, it says 70 ppm, or ppt. We're revising that. It's no longer protective, that's 70. So with our new RSL table, we are going to be updating that. We're in the midst of figuring out how we do that. Do we just pull it off the shelf, but it has a lot of good information in it that people want to see? Do we revise it? How long do we need to revise it? So we're looking into that. MCLs, I think everybody's focused on these MCLs that are coming out of our Office of Water. Again, we're looking at a draft of those by the end of December, so hopefully those show up soon. We're looking at mixtures. We've got a lot of questions about how you're dealing with mixtures of PFAS and other constituents. So we hope to have a draft set of, I don't want to call them guidance, but kind of best practices or thoughts on how we want that to work. RSL updates, again, it was kind of special that we went in and did this for those few PFAS. A lot of people focused on that RSL table update. We want to get back to the way we do it every 6 months, so these will become like any other constituent that's being added in there and updated. Some of these other ones I don't have kind of timelines around, but again, we're really digging in on analytical methods, data review. These are a big deal. We're seeing a lot of data coming out of DOD at this point, and they're publicly posting that. They're trying to mask it for identifiable information. Like they don't want this house on this street has this in their well because that could devastate the value of that house. So we're trying to figure out how we work with all that DoD data that's being produced. We're seeing numbers everywhere from, barely detect to hundreds of thousands of ppm or ppt. Additional source areas, as I mentioned before, for us, it's not just about looking for somebody who had AFFF, but we are looking at those areas where every few days they're out there doing training. My son-in-law is an Air Force pilot, and I was down when he got his wings, and I drove by the area where they had a big hulk that it was all burned out, and I said, how often do they burn that and put it out? He goes, once a week. And I said, I really hope they're not using AFFF, but they probably were, and they have the ability to use up what they've got and then before they can switch over. So we are seeing that going on. Again, other source areas, we don't want just, at least on my side of the Department of Defense, just looking for firefighting areas and foam areas. We want them looking at all the other sources that could be out there. Lots of industrial work went on these federal facilities that involve lots of chemicals. We see, of course, TCE everywhere. We're also looking into sampling methods, lysimeters, no-purge groundwater sampling, kind of how do we advance that science, because we know we're really going to need those analytical methods and the sampling methods as we move forward. And a big piece is the treatment methods. Right now, Eielson Air Force Base up in Alaska has 150,000 cubic yards of soil that was contaminated by the groundwater on site when they were extending a runway for the new F-35s. They've just got it piled on tarps with tarps over the top. They can't ship it down to Oregon, cost prohibitive. Do we have a treatment method that we can deal with that? That's one of the struggles that we're going through right now. And we're seeing that a lot where people are going through military construction or MILCON at these sites where they're extending runways. Firefighting areas, you're digging it up the soil has PFAS in it, now you've got a big mess. What's the next step? They're prohibited from incineration through their bill. Their budget bill said no, until studies are done, you can't incinerate this way, so it's a lot of times it's just sitting. We're trying to figure out what are the next steps. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. Again, one of the big priorities of EPA is looking at how do we incorporate environmental justice into our program. It's about protection and engagement. And again, I've mentioned engagement a lot of times. At least on the federal side, we're trying to get better about that. How do you make that part of what you do every day? And how do you do it in a very short time frame as a big organization like EPA, working with our regions, working with our states? Again, trying to get that into what we're doing and take quick steps to make sure that these communities are engaged and involved and they have opportunities to participate. We put out an action plan this September. Again, ensure compliance with our laws, make sure that there's opportunities during the regulatory development process for input. And then how do we engage on these permitting decisions, risk decisions, and those types of things that we're seeing at our sites for populations that may be disproportionately impacted, maybe environmental justice. I was down at Oak Ridge dealing with a community, historically African-American community that did not identify itself as environmental justice. They said, we're participating. We've got it. You don't need to kind of do special things for us. Other folks have said, we need help. Department of Defense puts out a 400-page risk assessment that's written by folks, and we don't understand what the outcome is for our community, how the remedies that are being proposed impact our community. How can we help them understand those? In our office, we're doing some things. We're trying to focus on the federal side on risk assessments. We want to look at getting some money out to explore different ways to deal with EJ at these PFAS sites that we're seeing a lot of. We've incorporated it as a criteria in some of our national awards that we're giving out, and we're doing some pilots on best practices. One of the big pilots is in Region 3. Region 3 is out of our Philadelphia office. So we're working with the Army, Navy, Air Force, 3 different sites, Pennsylvania, Virginia, thank you. And our goal there is to try and get through these pilots and find best practices. How can we better engage? How can we work with populations. We have a tribal population and indigenous population that we did not see on our screening tools. And again, we use these big picture screening tools, but they're not as good as being on the ground, not as good as talking to the community, being at those meetings. So that's one of the things we want to focus on coming up. Again, how do we dig in? How do we make sure we engage and we protect? And these are kind of the steps we're taking in taking action. We've got our tools. We're updating community involvement plans. We're trying to better understand the communities that we're in and we're working with. And then we're going to take action on those. We're going to use our tools that we have. We're going to update kind of information that we have. We're going to ensure that those considerations are included in risk assessments. And we're going to look at kind of non-site factors. 2 quick slides. I know this is something that's been a little difficult for the agency to wrap their head around in terms of how are we going to address the changes that we're seeing. For us, it has a lot to do with kind of actual and potential impacts to our sites. Long-term protectiveness and resilience. So it's not just on the, can we do green things? Can we put up wind farms? How can we make sure that these facilities are protective in the long term? We've got a fire season now that's just really, really long out west. And we've got a lot of federal facilities out there with remedies. Are we making sure that we're protective of that? Final one, we're doing a couple things in my office. One is we're looking at kind of an adaptation plan that we want to get out to folks sometime. Hopefully, I think October's passed, so we'll see if that's coming out soon. We have some internal things that we're doing. We're trying to train up our folks to make sure that they're aware of these, and we're putting out some bulletins for our people. So with that, I'll take any questions and love to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the audience? I'll make 2 quick observations as we prepare for our last panelist. At the PFAS conference in May, we are going to be going deep into the issue of environmental justice. We're going to have a special standalone panel on PFAS in Florida and environmental justice communities. So if you're interested, please get in touch with me. We're putting together that panel right now. That's number 1. And number 2, the concept of climate change and site rehabilitation in Florida is one that we've touched on in past conferences. I know that Mr. Mayorga down in Miami-Dade County is very focused on the wisdom of proposing engineering controls at sites where sea level rise may be an issue and located in floodplains. That's something the industry should likely be talking about on a going forward basis. We have a question.
Sure. Real quick, do you have any comments on something like an ombudsman or a private information officer? Do you have anybody that can help you like that on your team?
Sorry, the echo is pretty bad. I couldn't hear what'd you say?
Do you have anybody like an ombudsman or a private information officer who can help you all out with that kind of thing? Because you mentioned some of the issues with PR.
Yes, we do, and we're actually kind of reaching out to some of our contracts to try and find better ways to communicate with the public. We have excellent community engagement coordinators, but we just don't have enough of them at this point. It's something that we need to focus on, bringing more people who understand the communities kind of inside so they can help us. And unfortunately, we had a great one, like at Hunters Point in California. We had a person who had grown up in the community. She got her degree locally. She started working for us, and a private firm snapped her up, gone. We were just like, seriously? She was amazing. So we do see a lot of turnover sometimes in the ranks there when people find somebody who's really good. They can offer them more than we can give them.
Probably a tough question to answer, but what is your best estimate, best forecast on a drinking water standard that we can utilize?
What was the last part?
The best estimate for a drinking water standard for PFAS that we can utilize.
Again, I'd hate to, it's tough because, I mean, we have kind of what we think is we're going to see a draft out by the end of the year. Those things typically take another year or so. things may get complicated with us in the Hill here very shortly. So I'd hate to speculate on kind of a time frame, but when we get things out, it usually takes us, we try to shoot for a year to a final. That would be a hope. 18 months is probably more realistic.
Thank you for taking your time to get
Sure.
that right, because that's a very important decision.
Thank you.
Steve, along the lines of what Steve just asked, question on the minds of a lot of our clients, and I think a lot of the folks in this room, is this: when the numbers come down dramatically as a result of the new health advisory levels and all of the other processes that are going on within the agency, is EPA poised to go into enforcement mode? What is going to happen on that side of the house?
We are. I think you're going to see some things fairly shortly on the enforcement side. We're not allowed to really comment on what's ongoing, but both on the private side and the federal side, I think we do have some recalcitrant facilities that we've talked to them about the numbers. We always like to operate on consent if we can, but at times we can't get there. So there are some things going on now where we're not getting the level of cooperation I think we'd like to see from our regulated groups.
Okay, there you have it. Thank you so much, David. We appreciate
Thank you.
it. Thank you for coming down from Washington.